we're going to talk about a particular extraordinary warrior who was indefatigable in her pursuit of the liberation of girls and women from male sexual violence. And in this work that we do in talking about pornography and prostitution and male entitlement to female bodies and male sexual violence, it does take courage because we risk the displeasure of the patriarchy and of, some neoliberal feminist chat at the moment. And so I know that I need to pull on the courage of my foremothers who were so hell-bent on maintaining their integrity and their passion. And one of those foremothers is Andrea Dworkin. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with Andrea, I'm going to give you a little bit of framing about how she walked, how she lived, how she loved, and how she fought. And so just to open with some of her very own words, I'm going to quote to you from something that she said. And it goes like this: with pornography, a woman can still be sold after the beatings if the rapes, the pain, the humiliation haven't killed her. I write for her, on behalf of her. I try to intervene before she dies. I know her. I have come close to being her. So Andrea Dworkin was always in solidarity with girls and women. And this was who she was in the marrow of her bones. She, I think that one of the things that characterizes Andrea Dworkin the most is that she was unflinching in her determined look at how bad male sexual violence and male entitlement to female bodies actually is. She never looked away. She never looked away. And, that speech is just a little sliver of her soul, and her words and her speech were indeed her soul. And Gloria Steinem described Andrea as a prophet crying out in the wilderness. She was almost a woman who was before her time, because now, as you have heard this morning about how bad pornography has become and these systems of prostitution and trafficking, one of the most essential ways that we can regard and uplift her is to always remember her legacy and to carry on this battle for liberation that we are talking about today. And so how I became involved with getting to be a part of a documentary about Andrea Dworkin is kind of this embarrassment of riches, where
birazcık şöyle, Parça ve Palmer yapımcı, İngiliz bir film,
especially for her independent films, wrote me a letter, and Gloria Steinem mentioned it to me. The great Catherine McKinnon mentioned it to me, and I had the audacity to say no, because I'm a little bit foolish. And my partner and I have what we call this migratory pattern. We spend part of the year in the Democratic Republic of Congo. We're in Cambridge, Massachusetts. We're in Berlin, Germany. We're in Switzerland, and I'm also in Tennessee. And I just didn't know how I was going to work it out. And then never underestimate the power of a direct ask, one feminist to another. So Geraldine Dreyfus, who finances a lot of feminist documentaries, was over at our house for supper. And we were actually talking about a documentary series that I wanted to do about transformative justice between perpetrators of male sexual violence and their victim survivors, and how they could potentially have a restorative justice conversation, when she said, hey, I'm also going to help finance. My name is Andrea. Would you please play Andrea in her 40s? Now, I had enough sense to know that in her 40s was when Andrea was kind of at her oratorial heights, which is really saying something. And I'm going to have put in the chat one of her speeches from the Montreal massacre, when this man named Marc Lepine went into an engineering school, separated the men and the women, the male students and the female students, and slaughtered the females for being educated as engineers. And you can listen to Andrea's own voice as she gives this speech. And, I knew that Geraldine had financed, for example, the Invisible War, about the epidemic in the U.S. military of male U.S. soldiers raping female soldiers, American female soldiers, and also Hunting Ground, about the epidemic of of college campus assault, male students raping female students. And I was like, I just got to do this. This is the second time I'm being asked, and the universe is presenting me with an opportunity to really live my values. And so I had the extraordinary opportunity of starting to really sit with Andrea's texts. And for a couple of months, my partner and I just listened to her speeches from the archives. And, one of the great things about Andrea Dworkin is she never apologized. She never apologized. And she had a mouth on her that was so fantastic. So once she was on the Phil Donahue show, for those of you who remember that show, and she had on her overalls, which is typically what she wore. And she was on there with these snotty, horrible white men who were so patronizing and so condescending. And one of them said to her, what's wrong with you? What are you even wearing? You look like you just came off a farm. And just like that, Andrea said, you got a problem with farms? She just never backed down. And so one of the things we're going to segue into in a minute is what can I learn from Andrea? What can we learn from Andrea about our own backbone, about our character, about how we can be indefatigable in this pushing back against male entitlement to female bodies. And so I sat with her texts, I sat with her speeches, I sat with her books, and it was both inspirational and heartbreaking, because she did have a very lonely life, and she was afraid of being murdered. When she went into the halls where she gave speeches, there's footage of her, video footage of her saying, this door needs to be closed when I'm on stage, and can anyone come through that entryway? She didn't live in fear for her life, but she knew that her life was at risk. And this is the hill on which Andrea Dworkin was willing to die. And so that's one of my questions to myself. What is the up with which I will not put? And is feminism the hill on which I'm willing to die? And my answer to myself is yes. Yes, I am willing to die for girls and women today. And that's just my value system, because as Gail mentioned in my bio, the first time a man molested me, I was 7 years old. I went straight to 2 adults and they said, oh, he's a nice old man. That's not what he meant. I will put my life on the line for a girl today, and she will know that her body deserves integrity and autonomy. And I will stand up for her no matter what. So I had these incandescent, incendiary words booming off the walls of our house. And then when I got to set to play Andrea, we had 3 days set aside in which to film these speeches. And it only took me a day and a half. I mean, it was just in me. It just came out of me, and it just rushed and poured, because what I like to think is when we feminists really have the freedom and the lack of constraint of patriarchy, and we're not in that court of public opinion, we really know in the marrow of our bones, like Andrea Dworkin did, that this is our truth, that this is our truth. And so, as I said, I want to talk about lessons learned. And we're also putting in the chat the link to my name is Andrea. There are several other actors who play Andrea at other ages, but it is a documentary, so it's mostly footage of Andrea herself. The movie is playing at film festivals right now, but if you would like to screen it for your organization or agency or institution, you can contact the address info@mynameisanDrea, which we'll also put in the link, and they can send you a way to watch the movie. It's very beautiful, very educational, very, she did die young in 2005 at the age of 58. So please consider taking a look at the movie. So what have I learned from Andrea? I have learned to reframe my life by looking back at my experiences through this, as I said earlier, unflinching lens of how Andrea has helped me define male sexual violence, prostitution, pornography. So I think, the first moment that Andrea might have been proud of me, or where I could find it in myself to give myself credit for a moment, it was something that was mentioned earlier. I had just moved to Los Angeles. I was trying to make friends, and I went to a party near the University of Southern California campus. I was awkward. I was shy. I don't even know how I got invited there. And I heard this young man say to another man, hey, does your excuse my language and take care of yourself because it's very ugly. He said, does your bitch have any babe girlfriends? And I was like, it was just a knife. It was just a knife. Because when I casually overhear this, I know that men talk that way to each other more frankly and bluntly than they do when they know a woman is overhearing. And I just got up on an ottoman and made a speech. I analyzed what they said. I broke it down. I said all the ways in which it was totally unacceptable, and it was violent speech. Made my feminist point and walked out of the party and never saw those kids again. Never got invited back there again. And hey, not a crowd with whom I wanted to hang out anyway. And then another time when I looked back on an experience I had and I reframed it through Andrea's theory, is that when I was 15, a mentor in my life organized it for me to go to Tokyo, Japan to do something called modeling. And what I know now is that this was commercial sexual exploitation and a system of child sexual assault in which capitalism, through corporations, governments, and the public were complicit. And that's something about Andrea that I loved. She would take the ACLU to task because they would protect Nazis as free speech and pornographers as free speech, and never flinch from holding institutions and governments accountable. And the government of the United States and the government of Japan gave me an unescorted minor work visa. And they never should have done that. And all of these adults in my life, including my own parents, let me do that. And no one protected me. And this was a system of capitalism and patriarchy. And the first thing that happened to me when I got to that modeling agency is they told me to take off all my clothes and walk around the office in front of all the adults. And for the rest of the summer, my body was sold literally to the highest bidder, to the catalog company, the beer company, whoever was paying the highest for me to advertise their products. I was raped twice by someone who was French. I was molested by the head of the agency, and I was sexually assaulted by an American model. I lived in an apartment by myself. I was totally unprotected. And until I read Andrea Dworkin, I myself thought that I was a model. And then I realized it was commercial sexual exploitation with the complicity of governments, institutions, and capitalism. And I'm actually with my grandmother, who's a clinician, and I'm getting ready to do some badass work on that today. And today I say male sexual violence. I don't say, and male rape. I don't say I was molested. I say a man molested me. Like I hold personal accountability and don't allow for there to be impunity in my speech. And then I want to mention, the Nasty Woman poem that the great Nina Donovan wrote, that I had the honor of speaking at the 2017 Women's March. And there was such hypocrisy there, because the job from which I got fired for doing that, there is a male counterpart, and he is known on the internet for having photographed his genitals and sent it to people in his workplace. And the firm that had hired me to be a spokesperson for them, they knew that about this man before they hired him. And he is still representing that company. He's also being investigated for fraud. And today,
risolto
I know about that
soruşturması altında. Bu ikiyüzlülük
because Andrea Dworkin teaches me to go to companies and to go to legal affairs and to go to the next woman who was hired and to be a good bonobo, the primates who have strong female alliances, and to be direct with her and say, hey, this was my experience with that company, and you may want to know. Strong female alliances are necessary to disrupting patriarchy. And then I just want to share with you my most recent Andrea moment, because she was so disruptive. She was so disruptive, and she didn't care if she got called shrill. She didn't care if she got called a shrew. She just did what she did. She was persistent. She was defiant. She didn't care if she was called unattractive. She was loyal to the radical feminist fight. I was recently at a dinner for with a bunch of very, very wealthy people because we're trying to raise money for our bonobo camp in Congo. And the organizers thought that I might find some folks who would be willing to fund our camp. And so this man sitting next to me was the brother of a billionaire. And he started talking about how theoretically abortion could be this, and theoretically abortion could be that, and theoretically the disability adjusted life years of the aborted. And I was like, so over it. I was so over it. And I was like, elbowed my way in there. And I was like, hey, this isn't theory. As a real woman who was really raped by a real rapist and had real conception and had a real abortion, because rapists really have paternity rights in Kentucky and Tennessee. It was a total Andrea moment. Like, I was not going to let these rich white men get away with theoretically talking about abortion when a radical feminist was sitting at the table. Like, no way. So Andrea Dworkin lived in me in that moment. So that's a little bit about Andrea, and I'm also putting in the link in the chat a link to her archives where you can look at some of her books. Her writing is so spectacular. I mean, there was just nobody quite like her, and she was often a very lonely person. She was willing to pour herself into what she believed and didn't care who it pleased and didn't please, because she was willing to please the righteous movement of radical feminism. And I'm going to close by sharing with you a portion of her words, because really her words should stand as what I'm sharing with you today, from her speech in Montreal after that massacre I mentioned earlier, when a misogynist went into the engineering school and separated the male and the female students. And this is just how Andrea Dworkin rolled, you know, and it's something that she asks of all of us. It's something that she asks of all of us. So just come with me into Andrea's words, which, as I said earlier, is the marrow of her bones and her soul and her spirit, and really think about and feel what she has to say. And she didn't trivialize what I'm about to read. She opened this section of her speech by saying, it's hard to say this and it affects me too. So here we go. I think one of the most important commitments that anyone can make to life or to feminism is to make sure that you deserve your death if you die at the hands of a misogynist, that you have done everything that he in his mind accuses you of, that every act of treason he is killing you for is one you have committed. That is to say, political crimes, crimes against male supremacy, crimes against the right to rape, crimes against male ownership of women, crimes against the male monopoly of public space and public discourse. We have to stop men from hurting women in everyday life, in ordinary life, in the home, in the bed, in the street, in the engineering school. We have to take public power away from them, whether or not they like it. But one way or another, we have to disarm men. We have to be the woman who stands between men and the woman they want to hurt. We have to end the impunity of men, which is what they have for hurting women. And the feminist is the woman who is there, not because she is his woman, but because she is the sister to the woman he is a weapon against. Feminism exists so that no woman ever has to face her oppressor in a vacuum alone. Feminism exists to break down the privacy in which men rape, beat, and kill women. What I'm saying is that every one of us has the responsibility to be the woman Mark Lepine wanted to murder. We need to live with that real honor, that courage. We need to put fear aside. We need to endure. We need to create. We need to resist. Thank you so much for letting me share a little bit of the great Andrea Dworkin with you today. I'm so honored to be a part of this webinar. Thank you so much to everyone who is presenting. I appreciate your courage and your intelligence, and let's keep up the fight. Thank you.